Welcome back to the Donkey Vote podcast with Francis.
Tobias.
And George. These interviews will be focusing on the past careers of politicians before they entered parliament.
With a strong intention to our audience that anything is achievable no matter what you studied in university or college.
If you like this sort of content, please make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share with your friends. Also, we are on YouTube and Spotify, so make sure you follow us on those platforms.
Make sure to follow us on Instagram as well to keep updated with the latest episodes and reels that we release.
Enjoy
the interview.
Today we are joined by our actually first Canadian MP on the podcast, Ken Hardie, from Fleetwood and Port Kells. Ken, thank you for joining us today.
A pleasure to be with you.
Ken, just for our audience out there who may not know an entire lot about you, could you give us a little brief description of yourself and of the riding of Fleetwood and Port Kells, which I'm sure a lot of our Australian viewers may not have heard of, just so they have a little little bit better of an idea of yourself just before we get into the questions.
Sure. Well, we'll start with the riding itself. I think a lot of Canadians haven't heard that much about Fleetwood Port Kells. We're a portion of the city of Surrey, which is to the east of the city of Vancouver. In the Metro Vancouver area, we have over 21 different municipalities that sort of make up this area. It's a fairly prosperous riding. We have a mixture of urban, rural, light industrial, etc. And I've represented this riding since 2015. According to the polls, I've lost every election, but somehow I keep showing up in Ottawa, and here I am. And personally, I'm an older chap. I know you can't tell, but
Oh, you were just in your 50s, Ken.
Yes, I know. Actually, I'm only 27. This is what politics does to you. No, my first career was in radio. I was a broadcaster for 15 years, and then I moved into what my colleagues in radio called the dark side. I went into corporate communication for a couple of public entities. One, the public auto insurer here in British Columbia. There was a short period of time as director of communication with the Vancouver Police, and then I moved on to the Regional Transportation Authority, which handles road transit, all sorts of things here in Metro Vancouver. And then in 2013, I retired from that. And there's an old saying, you know, with spouses, your wife marries you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. So I had to go out and find something to do. And so I got active with the Liberal Party. I'd been a member since 1969. And decided to put my name forward as a candidate, was selected as the candidate in 2015, and here I am, almost 9 years later.
9 years later, and as you've said, a lot of opinion polls have maybe said that you might have lost your seat, but you're still here, you're still going. So at the end of the day, opinion polls are just opinion polls, and it's actually election results that matter.
Yeah, that does make a difference. Just one example of three. In 2021, the last campaign, the day before the election, I was behind 2 points to my conservative opponent, who's actually a friend. We've been buddies for a long time. And then all of a sudden, the skies opened and votes came from the heaven, and we won by 15 points. So just goes to show you that sometimes polling, particularly in these days where people don't have landlines and are harder to actually reach, methodologies are changing. And I don't think they've changed in a way that produces very reliable results, or if our experience is any experience.
And we've had previous elections here in Australia where the polls have really pushed towards one certain political party, and the actual election result is completely different. So I think, as you were saying, polls now are becoming less and less reliable. But I guess a lot of pollsters are finding different ways to connect with people, whether that be focus groups, or whether that be actually ringing up people on their home phones, that sort of thing. Actually going and speaking to people like on the doorstep. Like those are sort of different ways, I guess, they can alleviate the lower attendance of people actually answering their landlines.
Well, I think in fact, what they're relying on more is assembling panels. And they, from what I understand, they essentially keep going back to the same people, which is a little dodgy then when it comes to methodology. The other thing to consider too, I was I'm the chair of a special committee on Canada-China relationships. So we're
Hmm.
doing our Indo-Pacific strategy, and we know Australia has one. A lot of people have one. But I was in Taiwan about a year and a half ago,
Oh,
and discovered that there was Chinese interference in their public surveys, in their polling. And I think our pollsters, the people who actually run the companies here, are very straight up and very ethical. But it doesn't mean to say that there's not some tomfoolery taking place within some of these panels. Who knows? But it is something to keep in mind.
exactly, exactly. At the end of the day, sometimes pollsters do have a little bit of a bias to one political party or another, so there can always be some tomfoolery around. For sure. I think we'll now get started with our questions for you, Ken. So, my first question to you is, how was your high school and university life? Hopefully, I mean, it was quite a long time ago, sadly, but hopefully you have some good memories to share for the podcast.
Well, yes. I mean, I actually was lucky enough to have a parking spot for my dinosaur at the University of British Columbia. Um, I went to a number of different schools on my way through the public school system here in Canada, first in Alberta, where I was born actually, and then in British Columbia. And we had a very well-rounded education. We had everything from, the very high-end English, sciences, etc., right down to woodworking, metalworking, and electrical working, So we had a good shot at just about every facet of it. And in the early days, especially in high school, we had to make a choice whether or not we were going to be on what was called the university program or a general program. A university program, obviously, you would take courses aligned to getting you into university. General program was more oriented toward the trades. And, a lot of people went through each channel and have come out okay. You get a pretty darn good salary for being able to fix a motor in Canada right now, and I think it's probably the same in a lot of places. In university, I actually didn't finish university. Situation, I ran out of money. It happens, but I did take actually almost the mirror image of the courses I took in high school. I took a combination of sciences, economics, English, just a well-rounded approach to things with no specific outcome in mind, but the intention was to, if you like, build a toolbox that could be very, very useful regardless of what actual work I was going into.
Hmm. And that's quite good as well. Having those sort of different skills and different environments is really, really crucial. Um, and that's a quite a different system. Do you think as well, just going back to the fact from your experience in the education system in Canada, do you think it's changed a lot since you were in school and you were in university, seeing as it was a long time ago, but are those still the same models around, picking a different stream still there, or are there a lot of differences now?
Well, I think over time and as costs of education go up, the public school system has had to realign itself. So things like music class or woodworking or some of the others may not be as sort of universally available from school to school. So there are certain things that people would value having that may not be as available as they used to be. One thing that actually really bothers me in my home community of Surrey, we have the largest school district in British Columbia, and British Columbia is a pretty big place. Uh, we have, as part of the curriculum, a course on civics, but I was really upset to find out that nobody's teaching it. And these days, particularly because of the influence of that bubble that we create around ourselves with our cell phones, I think civics it should be mandatory. I think everybody should really get a sense as to how democracy actually works and to get their hands on it in some form, because the absence of that is creating a lot of the dislocation, a lot of the difficulties that we are seeing I just hit something and I hope I'm still coming through.
Yeah, you still, yeah.
Yeah, okay. A lot of the difficulties we are seeing in public life right now, the public life of our citizens and the public life of our elected officials, go back to the fact that people haven't necessarily been educated or made aware or engaged enough in what actually makes our society work.
And that's a really big issue as well around, how polarization's really affected us now in a sense, via social media, via being on our cell phones. It's really divided us. And I think it does go back to the fact a lot of people are pretty disenfranchised with the political system at the current moment, and they may not have the entire great knowledge of how politics and how in a democracy, the government cannot really control everything you do. Sometimes there's a bit more around, taking on your own self-responsibility for actions that you commit. So there is a little bit of a disenfranchisement, and it's really led to this, I think, polarization, which I'm assuming you're probably seeing a lot in Canada as well at the current moment.
Well, absolutely. And again, I if I had my cell phone with me and I keep it far away from all of this gear, I'd hold it up and say, this is the bubble that we create around ourselves. And the algorithms will keep feeding us what we like, not necessarily what we need. So
Mm,
it's entirely possible for somebody to totally isolate themselves from the range of opinions and views on things that are out there. And it does take almost deliberate action on an individual's part to have at least an online subscription to various newspapers, including some that you disagree with vehemently. But you need to know what your fellow citizens are thinking about. And sometimes, and if you kind of have a reasonable approach to life, you have the fortitude to actually accept the fact that sometimes those people that you don't agree with most of the time, you can agree with some of the time. So these are all things, these are all dynamics that I point the finger at the algorithms that the online platforms use, because they just keep giving us brain candy instead of the nourishment that we actually need, the intellectual nourishment to be good citizens.
exactly. And after a while, when you just continuously and continuously see this brain candy, as you describe over and over again, it really does play with your psyche and your mind, and it can really change who you are as a person. So at the end of the day, and how social media is really set up, if you continuously scroll and you see the same things over and over again, it picks up what you're interested in. And if you're seeing all this brain candy all the time, it'll just continuously repeat, repeat, and repeat. So it is quite a big issue, as you've outlined there.
Yeah, yeah, it is, and I think the action that we take to deliberately expose ourselves to different points of view, the more well-rounded we'll be, and the more healthy our communities will be.
Mm-hmm. And are there any plans with the government you think to maybe try and alleviate this pressure by maybe raising up the required age to visit social media? I know our government here in the opposition, the Liberal opposition and the Labour government here have now starting to put forward legislation to raise the age of to be able to use social media up to between 14 to 16 years of age.
Good luck with that. Good luck with that. I mean, that horse bounded out of the stable a long, long time ago. I think he would have an extremely difficult path to do that, unless they found some gadget that you could put on their kids' phones to block that sort of thing. No, I think if I was kind of in charge of that policy here in Canada, what I would do is instead target hardened people to understand what's going on in social media and to make some personal choices that will make them better all-around citizens. Yeah, the other way, well, as I say, good luck with that. Now that I know somebody's thinking of doing it, we'll watch with great interest to see how it works.
Yeah, we will see for sure. We will see how if it can actually be implemented or if it actually works. But yeah, totally agree with you there, Ken. So we'll move on now to our second question for you, Ken. This comes from Tobias.
Yeah, Ken, prior to Parliament, you worked in radio and broadcasting for nearly 15 years, heading all the way across British Columbia, Manitoba? I think I missed
Manitoba,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
Manitoba, yeah, Manitoba,
yeah,
Ontario. Yeah,
and
yeah.
Toronto,
I
yeah,
think I missed.
Ontario, Manitoba,
Ontario.
and
Okay.
a few different places
Yeah.
in British Columbia. Yes.
Uh, what were some of your favorite moments being a broadcaster, and what are some some of the similarities between being on radio and being an MP?
Well, I kind of used the analogy of the toolbox earlier on. to describe what your education can set you up with as you go forward into life and do all kinds of things. And broadcasting added immeasurably to the toolbox that I've carried into the various works that I've done. Favorite moment employed the notion of radio working the theater of the mind. We had a fellow visit our station, which was, I was working at a radio station up north in British Columbia. And there, live on the radio, this full-size human contorted himself into a Coca-Cola can. And that wasn't enough to just do that on the radio. Now, you have to think about that for a second, right? He said, no, I'm going to do it again out in front of the station at 4 o'clock this afternoon. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, there were a few dozen people hanging around the corner waiting for this to happen. Somebody came out, put the Coke can down on the sidewalk. Somebody else stood on it, and somebody else walked up and looked down and said, I can see him. I can see him. Yeah, theater of the mind. It's a great thing. And in some respects, we still have to do that. As a radio guy, all noise, no picture, I came across as very tall, with a full head of hair, quite muscular. If I put up a picture of George Clooney, they probably would have believed me, but anyway, there you are.
This is back like a long time ago, wasn't this, Ken? Or was it back in your early days in radio?
Well, no, I mean, the early days of radio go back over 100 years now. One of the first radio stations in kind of the modern form in the world was a station that Marconi himself put on the air in Montreal, which became CFCF radio. And that is back like in 1918, and I'm not quite that old, but we still, we're just a cut above banging the rocks together. We managed.
Exactly. And radio, sadly, with the emphasis now on television, has really started to go, I guess, there's less demand for it, in a sense. Back in the 50s and 60s and the 70s, radio was a very big thing, but now I guess it's starting to drop off a little bit. But sometimes listening to the radio is quite, it's quite good to listen to someone's voice, talking about something, listening to the music on the radio, just some broadcasts. It's really good to listen to. But I guess with the younger generations now, it's not as much of a part of their culture as much as, watching television or watching free-to-air TV and cable TV is.
Well, I think that certainly radio's had competition from television right since the early 1950s, at least in North America. But there's also a ton of competition from people who don't see any pictures. They just listen to the music that they have on their playlists on their phone or wherever. So, it's just radio kind of a different form. Interestingly enough, I hope it's interestingly enough, I'm not running for re-election. I'm retiring after this parliament. If it goes the full distance, I'll have had 10 years in one day, and that's about enough. But I'm going back into radio. I'm going to be working on a community FM station up in the interior of British Columbia, seeing if we can revive the magic that we used to have. And I think we can.
And that's quite interesting as well, Ken, that you're coming to the end of your tenure in politics. And we do have a question related to that later on. But my next question actually to you relates to, as you said previously, before your career as a corporate spokesperson. So additionally, you worked as a media spokesperson for TransLink, a regional transportation authority in British Columbia, and Insurance Corporation of British Columbia as well. How are working at these companies overall, and did you have any highlights from your past experiences there that you'd like to share?
Well, I think one of the attributes that I learned along the way in radio, I carried forward into the work at both those public agencies. And the attribute had to do with what we call in the radio business, trading minds. In other words, put yourself in the shoes of the listener. Look at the world through the listener's eyes and build affinity with them by kind of harmonizing with, what they see, what they're experiencing, et cetera, et cetera. It can be done even though you may be speaking to, many thousands of people all at once. You're really only speaking to one person, right? And that same orientation I managed to carry forward into the public affairs work I did for those two agencies. If somebody came with a problem,
Mm.
I looked after them one on one. Somebody had a problem at an elevator at one of our rapid transit stations. Well, I gave the guy a monthly pass, right? And everybody said, "Oh, you can't do that. You'll just open the floodgates." No, no. You look after people one at a time. You trade minds with them. You empathize with them. You build that affinity with them. And that's the learning that I had in media that I carried forward into public affairs. And in doing that, I helped to take two agencies that had been suffering quite badly in terms of the public opinion toward them. And we turned it around, and we turned it around quite dramatically and quite quickly, just simply by forgetting what we wanted to tell the people
Mm.
and listening to what the people wanted to tell us and finding a way to play it back to them. And I mean, I don't care what kind of activity you're in. If it involves a relationship with somebody or a whole
Mm.
bunch of somebody's, that's an orientation that, we've proven time and time again works pretty well.
It really does. And those sort of relationships you build as an advisor, as someone, as a spokesperson of a company is really, really crucial with the media and that sort of thing. Because at the end of the day, you're the one speaking for the company. So you've got to have that really good interconnected relationship with the public and the media and, back in headquarters with the company, with the CEOs and the board members and, the staff as well.
Well, and sometimes you have to bridge. It's very easy for a political party or a company executive to be really distrustful and not like the media very much. And you
Mm.
can understand why that is. The media reports on exceptions. As I said to the executive at TransLink, the Transportation Authority, if all of a sudden the news is that 5 million people used our system today and everybody got to where they were going and there were no problems, if that's
It would be no
news, we have a
news.
big problem. We have a
Mm.
really big problem, right? And so my own orientation, obviously coming from the media, I always treated the reporters with the respect that they deserve. They're not your friends. They're not there to tell your story for you, but they are there to process information on behalf of their listeners and viewers. And so you treat them with respect and you get respect back. That's been almost invariable. Now, mind you, this is back in the days when, what we now call the mainstream media really carried the ball in most cases. We do have, podcasts such as yours. We do have a lot of people with a professional looking microphone going on and playing the media game. I cannot say that somebody with my orientation would do terribly well with all of them because there are some out just to get you. Mind you, I'm not easy to
But hopefully
get.
we're not
So
part of that group, Ken.
yeah. Okay, there you go.
Mm. But yeah, I do agree with you there. The change in the media landscape over the past like 5, 10 years is really changing. And I think it also does relate to the fact, a lot of people can't really sit and watch the news now for 1 hour show. They get quite bored. I think it's around a lot of attention spans. And as we've said previously, scrolling on Instagram Reels, TikTok, that sort of thing. It's quite satisfying for some people just because of the fact that, they aren't able to really focus for a long period of time.
Yeah, I think attention spans have definitely shrunk. I actually floated the concept with well, I forget what his profession was. I think he was a psychologist of acquired attention deficit disorder.
Mm.
I think that's a thing, to be honest with you.
I think
And
it is, yeah.
you just kind of described that.
It really is. And it's quite concerning if more and more young people are going to have these sort of attention disorders, because at the end of the day, when you're at work, when you're, doing anything, productive, you've got to be focused fully on the task to try and get a job done as quickly as possible and without as many mistakes as possible. So if more and more young people are having attention deficit disorders or acquired attention disorders, as you said, Ken, it is quite concerning for the future.
Well, it's definitely something that at least merits our observation anyway. I have, I have kids, and some of them really got into video games, and they would spend hours on one
Mm.
level on a game working through. So, the situation isn't hopeless, but certainly there are challenges out there.
So I think now we'll move on to our next question then for you, Ken. And this, as you said previously, this is your last term in government, and this kind of relates to, your last term and some things that, some of the mo memorable moments and some things you might regret from politics. Tobias?
Oh, to
Yeah.
be honest with you, the only thing I regret is kind of the very human trait that we all have, and that is we have limited bandwidth.
Mm,
It is horrible to be in that huge banquet of issues and interesting things, knowing that you cannot get involved in all of them, right? At
exactly.
least, if you're a slave to your self-control, you're going to say, look, there's just some stuff I cannot engage with because I won't do anything well. That's really been the most difficult aspect of it. Sure, there's the politics and all the is BS a technical term? I hope it is. That goes on. Okay, it's just part of the game, and on you go, right?
Mm. And Tobias, as you were saying before, what was part of the question that you wanted to ask as well?
Yeah. You've been you've been in for 9 years, a part of the Liberal government for all the 9 years. What would you say has been your highlight in being parliament, and what's something you regret?
Ken's already said what he
Well,
regrets there.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the regret first. The only thing I regret is having to sit through extended voting periods, which actually we changed the rules now so they don't happen anymore. The last one, I've been in three of them. I got up Wednesday morning at around 7 in the morning, and the next time I saw my bed was Saturday at midnight, and we were voting right through. It was a stunt that the opposition pulled off that they, had the right to do. So yeah, we could do without that. As as an individual member of parliament, it's the work on committees that I've enjoyed the most. I've spent time on the transport committee. I've been on the Fisheries and Oceans Committee since 2015. And for the last going on 2 years now, I've been the chair of a special committee on Canada-China relationships. And it's really kind of an interesting dynamic because we have some pretty sharp dividing lines in terms of partisan beliefs and values between the various parties in our parliament. But when we get into the committee room, quite often they become collaborative. Here's the problem. We're all on the same side of the chair looking at the problem. What are we going to do with this, right? Everybody's going to have their own ideas, etc. But
Exactly.
I find the exchanges, I find the inquiries of witnesses, etc., very interesting. If anything, I've found being the chair of a committee really quite manic because I'd rather be involved in the actual questioning of witnesses, and trying to draw out the information instead of being like the referee in a hockey game. It's been an incredible experience. And then at home, I mean, I can tell you stories about some of the things that our office has accomplished that just staggeringly great. I mean, it's the intrinsic enjoyment we get out of seeing something work that makes it all worthwhile.
Mm. And that's the really, really important things because I actually work in a political office in Australia, and seeing the people that you actually help sometimes. And yesterday we actually got correspondence from the assistant immigration minister about one lady that we helped a couple months back, trying to get her citizenship through and get it all processed through, and eventually found out that it's all been processed, and she's now actually got her permanent visa, and she'll be getting her citizenship in a couple of years' time. And it's really great to see, the people that you've actually helped and you've tried to push forward and push in the right direction. They're able to get the resources and the things they need, and been able to progress further on in their lives.
Sure. Well, we had one case that was written up in the Guardian newspaper and featured on the BBC, and we brought it to a very successful conclusion. I'm sure we don't have time to go into the whole story, but that was a big one, and we've had others like it.
Which is really great to see, that those sort of outcomes being achieved. And I believe now I have the next question for you, Ken. So, who would you say is your political role model or idol, if you actually have a political role model or idol?
Well, the politician that I respected the most was a former Prime Minister, Lester Pearson. Uh, Prime Minister Pearson headed government in the mid to late 1960s. Mid to late 1960s.
Mm,
His was always a minority government. He never had a majority. but he managed with the cooperation of other parties to get some really, really landmark legislation through our national Medicare plan, our unemployment insurance plan, the Canada Pension Plan. A lot of things, came through during his tenure. But then again, he had already distinguished himself as Canada's foreign affairs minister for solving the issue with Britain, France, and others around what was the Suez crisis in the 1950s. And he won the Nobel Peace Prize for that.
Oh,
So
wow.
he was very, very pragmatic, good politician, but also knew how to trade minds with people and really, fit the bill. A close second is another Liberal Prime Minister, Jean Chrétien, who had very healthy majorities back in the late 1990s into the 2000s. And he was the kind of guy who just took care of business. There were times I think Canadians had to remind themselves, who the heck is prime minister these days? Because he wasn't sort of an in-your-face, charismatic kind of guy. He was a real character, but he just took care of business. He was a very, very solid leader and a solid administrator. And he's still around. He's quite the character too, and I enjoy meeting him.
Yeah, as you know, as you said, he's 90 years old now and he's still around, and he's kind of like I guess like the bit of a godfather within the Liberal Party in Canada, someone you kind of have to look up to as you do as well. And of course there's of course the most famous Prime Minister in Canada, which I think most of our viewers may have heard of, being the father of the current Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau. Would you also consider him a bit of a political role model and idol as well?
He was quite unique, a
Yes.
tremendously intellectual fellow. I met him once. He was very short, and that surprised me when I met Justin Trudeau for the first time, because Justin Trudeau is very tall. He
Yeah.
takes after his grandfather, and I mean, there's a grand political lineage, that meets at Justin Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau did something that I keep reminding my colleagues of back in, when he became prime minister when Lester Pearson retired, and then took the party into an election and just won an amazing majority. What Mr. Trudeau did, Trudeau 1.0, is he had a bunch of things that were important societally to Canada, but what he managed to do was to create an umbrella vision for it all.
Mm,
And the term was the just society,
mm,
which was really important. It was important, very important socially in Canada back in those days. The business of LGBTQ2, which actually wasn't the term back then, but he took that out of the criminal code. His famous line was, the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation, right? He was also a tough guy too. We've always had a separatist element in Quebec. And it got to the point where mailboxes were being blown up, people being kidnapped. There was a murder involved and all the rest of it. And Pierre Trudeau was not a fearful man. He invoked the War Measures Act. And reporters asked him, said, we're seeing soldiers on our streets with guns. How far are you prepared to go with this? And Trudeau's answer to him was, just watch me, right? So he was one of a kind.
he really was one of a kind, and he's someone, I guess, in a global sphere in terms of politics. When you look to Canada, you kind of think of Pierre Trudeau, and you kind of think of those times within Canada. So he is someone as well that is a great political role model and idol. And I think now we'll move on to our next question then for you, Ken, and this comes from Tobias relating to why you ran in 2015.
Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
what made you run in the 2015 federal election for the Liberal Party, and what made you join the Liberal Party?
Well, I've been a member of the Liberal Party since Lester Pearson was the Prime Minister. So this is
Mm,
back in the late 1960s. I was at UBC, the University of British Columbia, at the time. And when I retired from the Transportation Authority, I got more engaged in the Liberal Party again. And the thing that really spurred me to want to run was, first of all, I'd had an interest in doing so for a while, but I also had a really good reason. The Conservatives had been in power for quite some time, for almost 10 years. And their neoliberal policies just didn't harmonize well with my personal values. Let's put it that way. I did not like the kind of decisions that the government under Stephen Harper was making. I didn't like the personality of that government either. A personality that seems to have transcended to the current version of the conservatives on steroids and Red Bull. So I thought that, you know, it was time for Canada to start looking after the people that the free market was leaving behind. And we have a fellow who's, you know, been kind of on the periphery of the Liberal Party. His name is Mark Carney. He's the former governor of the Bank of Canada and the former governor of the Bank of England. And
Mm,
he spoke to us a couple of years ago, and he said something that really crystallized what I felt was my reason for wanting to be directly engaged as a liberal. And he said, you know, the market is the greatest thing that we've ever created. Its dynamism just cannot be duplicated anywhere. But the market, the free market, is blind to people's needs. So where there's a gap between what the market values and what people's values are, it's the job of politics to close that. And that's been kind of something that has been an anchor for me, you know, just to keep me in the right spot, at least politically and any other way, you know, through all of the, you know, the back and forth and the ups and downs of political life. And so I came into it with a certain thing in mind, and that thing has kind of remained my North Star, if you want to be dramatic about it,
mm,
ever since.
which is really, really important. At the end of the day, you got to have that sort of drive of why you wanted to run. And, you know, as you said, you know, Stephen Harper's policies really pushed you to run for Parliament. And, that drive and that commitment's paid off because, as you said, you come to the end of your term, but you've been there for 9 years, which is quite a long political career for a Canadian politician, seeing as, not many people are lucky enough to represent a riding, especially your riding, which probably would be considered a quite marginal sort of riding for such a long period of time.
Oh, it had been a conservative riding since it was created in 2004, and we won it in 2015. So the woman MP, Nina Grewal, who's actually a very, very sweet person, you know, thought that she pretty much had it sewed up, and we kind of surprised her.
Mm, mm. And that 2015 election was a very big turning point in Canadian politics, with
Yes.
the election of Justin Trudeau, of course. And hopefully maybe they can have they announced the new candidate for Fleetwood and Port Kells yet, the Liberals? Hopefully they've got a very good chance of holding on to the seat and continuing your legacy, Ken.
No, we haven't had our nomination yet. There's only one person that I know of that's been working hard to gain the nomination, and that person has my support. So I think that what we managed to try and do, because we did flip the riding from conservative to liberal, is to sink the roots as deeply as we can into the riding. And I guess the proof of that will be in the next election with a new candidate and a government that, let's face it, has been around for a long time. If we manage to keep this riding red, which is the Liberal color, I will be very satisfied with that.
Which I'm sure a lot of Liberal supporters in Fleetwood would be very satisfied with that as well.
Yes.
And now we're moving on to our final question for you, Ken. So finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are now starting university or college or high school now, as a lot of Canadian students are?
You're looking for advice for them?
Yeah, just some advice you'd give to them,
Yeah.
especially, yeah, that's mainly the whole kind of role of the podcast as well, just to kind of show to younger people that politicians come from all different sorts of backgrounds, and it doesn't matter what background you came from to you can all be successful in life. So just some advice for them who may be struggling, who may not know exactly what they want to do.
Well, I think it's always good to stretch your boundaries. Again, our personal electronics devices do allow us to create this bubble around ourselves. So, person-to-person contact, understanding the dynamics of a relationship. It's reality, affinity, and communication. Those are the three ingredients, the essential ingredients that create any kind of a relationship. And understand those dynamics and know how you can affect the health of a relationship. Be curious, be a critical thinker. Just because, somebody online says that Abraham Lincoln always preferred Fender guitars doesn't mean to say you have to agree with that. So question things. A healthy skepticism, even for people watching this podcast. Who's this old guy from Canada? What the hell does he know,
Exactly.
right? Okay, that's great. That's good. That's the sort of attitude. But it's also important that we relearn the habit of being able to disagree without being disagreeable. That really is a dynamic that we're seeing far too much of in Canada, to a fairly well in the United States. I don't know the situation in Australia, but have a feeling that there's some pretty good political dust-ups there from time to time. I would hear rumors, right? But we can disagree, but we can be respectful. And we can use the disagreement as an opportunity to do two things: to learn something that we might need to know, and also to look for that one point of commonality that allows at least some kind of a relationship to proceed. I mean, these are all kind of, fluffy, high-level things, but they do, in my view anyway, represent an opportunity for people who are going to be running the place one day to prepare themselves to actually do that. And then, try different things. Everybody's going to have a few different jobs in their life. They're going to run into people all over the place. Learn the tactic that we learned in radio, to bring us back to the beginning, of trading minds with people. Put yourself in their shoes. Look at the world through their eyes. Relate to them in that fashion, and you'll find you'll be very successful.
Exactly. And as you were saying, trying to broaden your sphere of people, listening to people who don't have the same opinions as you is really, really important. Because at the end of the day, in every single job you work in, you'll be with people who probably, as you've experienced, can, being in Parliament, you're with people who you fundamentally may disagree with and everything. So coming to common ground and coming to an area where, you can actually understand their opinion and listen to them and offer your own opinion in a respectful way is really, really important in any term, in any job, and throughout all of society.
Yeah, and really, there are ways of asking people questions without challenging them.
Mm.
So somebody says, "Well, I believe this, that, and the other." You can say, "Well, why do you believe something so foolish?" Right? Or you can say, "Yeah, I'm really interested in how you came to that landing. Tell us about
Mm.
that." I mean, but this is a bit of experience speaking, because I made a lot of mistakes in time. I'm like an old piece of furniture, all kind of
Mm.
dinged up and clawed by the cat. Uh, People don't have to go through that to be successful. But let's face it, you are going to run into situations where things will go sideways on you.
Exactly.
Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, keep on going. In a week, nobody else will remember it except you.
Really, that's a great piece of advice there, Ken. At the end of the day, don't leave yourself so low on certain issues and certain things that happen in your life.
Well,
Just got to
yeah,
keep
fear
moving
fear
forward
of
and have
failure.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, fear of failure holds people back.
exactly.
And some of the most successful people on earth have failed any number of times and
Mm.
said, "Okay, well, we know that's not going to work. Let's try something else."
Exactly. And having that growth mindset, as we've said previously on the podcast, is imperative, and it's so important to, being able to be successful as you have outlined there, Ken. So those are actually all our questions for you, Ken. I do really appreciate you coming on the podcast and speaking to us about, your career before politics in radio, and your time in Parliament, and some advice you'd give to students, who are studying university and high school. So we do really appreciate you sparing about an hour of your time in a busy parliamentary day. And with Parliament sitting next week, sorry, on Monday, it's probably quite a busy
Yeah,
time in
I'll
the office.
be
So,
I'll be in the air tomorrow, flying back to Ottawa,
mm,
and getting myself set up for what's going to be a very, very lively session of Parliament. That's for sure.
I'll hopefully be able to tune into that. And I think some of our viewers hopefully might be able to tune in and listen to what's happening in Canadian Parliament, because I do find it quite funny sometimes and quite interesting, just looking at the atmosphere and the sphere, and what's being said, and these sort of ludicrous things being said by some political parties at that point.
Oh yeah. Well, clickbait is a thing, right?
Exactly.
I was sitting in on a committee yesterday, and the conservative members were being really, really nasty, really outrageous.
Mm.
But of course, what they were doing was looking for clicks that they could put on their Facebook or Instagram. And they raise money doing that. And there's people who like that sort of stuff. So, um, I almost think that we made a big mistake in allowing television into the chambers. I think we could go back to the magic of radio and the theater of the mind, and uh, and let people stretch their imagination,
Exactly, you know.
larger than 40 inches, right?
Exactly, exactly. And even here in Australia, I know, because I work in the Parliament of my home state province, so I don't actually work in the federal Parliament here, but in our state province, it's televised live, so you can watch it on the live stream, and you can see this the amount of because last week as I was quite because we're in a very similar situation to you in a sense in Canada. Our Labor government here in Victoria has been in power since 2014, so nearly 10 years now, and it's quite old and it's quite regis and not the best currently for Victorian people. There's a lot of new taxes, a lot of, there's a huge amount of debt. And the Liberals here were trying to really, you know, we're pushing a lot of things and we're raising motions on Thursday. I was watching Parliament from my office, from the office of my MP there, and they were pushing motions around talking about certain infrastructure projects that Labor's neglected, and what they've invested in these sort of things. And then the Labor Party, in retaliation, were raising motions about and trying to raise low confidence in the leader of the Liberal Party, it was quite an interesting dynamic watching that in Parliament. And you just seeing the amount of attacks from both sides was quite interesting to see.
Well, and I think that we have question period here, along the British system and tradition, it's a waste of time, to be honest with you, because it
Mm,
is just people posturing. I think that the best thing any politician can do, anybody can do, is just go to street level, talk to
mm.
people there. They're the ones who really count. All this other stuff, it's just noise.
It's all noise. It's all
Yeah.
it's all an act. It's all it's just to create drama and that sort of thing. So
But it
it
can be a
really
lot of fun when you're
it
in
can
it,
be fun to watch. It's very entertaining to watch sometimes, especially when a certain politician will say something that's quite funny, and we've got our characters in Victorian and Australian federal parliament. I'm sure you've got the same in Canada. So when they get up to speak, it's going to be quite a funny show to listen to.
You got it.